Today is November 15th, 2013. We're doing an oral history interview for the archives at the University of Alabama in Huntsville. I'm Charles Lundquist. Our guest today is Rainer Klauss. Rainer, we're very pleased to have you with us today.
Well, I appreciate the opportunity.
We want to start out, I hope, by learning a little bit about your father, who was one of the people who joined the von Braun team from Germany.
Right.
Can you tell us a little bit about your father, please?
All right.
And then we'll get on to your career, too.
My father was born in Berlin in 1914.
Do you know the date?
May the 9th, actually.
All right, that's good for the record.
In 1929, he began an apprenticeship as a draftsman with a company called Orenstein and Koppel, and worked for them 3 years as an apprentice. And under the German apprenticeship program, not only did he learn drafting, but they were introduced to industrial methods, assembly, manufacturing, industrial production. So he got a full spectrum of what that sort of thing could
I guess we call that design in some way.
Design, yes, exactly, right. So he trained for 3 years, and then in 1932 came out of that program right into the German Depression. Could not find a job for 2 years, and then in 1934 he got a job working for the German post office in Berlin. His father was a post office official, so there was a little bit of nepotism there.
All right.
But in those days, any kind of thing you could get was
whatever you could do was good.
Right.
Yep.
In 1935, he went to work for the German train locomotive bureau, and they were working on designing steam engines. Also, the title of the outfit makes me think they were trying to consolidate various engine types into a most efficient, serviceable train engine for what they needed.
Standardization.
Standardization, very good. These terms don't come easy to me because this is not my world.
All right.
He worked there until 1939, and then through a newspaper advertisement saw that they were advertising for designers in Peenemünde, the German rocket experimental station, and went to work there March the 1st, 1939. And
what sort of thing was he hired to do?
Okay, he was at the beginning he was working as a designer and a draftsman, and then he got into designing valves and pumps for the V2. In the latter part of those years, 44, he was working on the German anti-aircraft missile, the Wasserfall.
Yeah.
And of course, by that time they'd already left Peenemünde and had spread out all over the country.
Diversified.
Right, exactly. Trying to keep things going as such.
Not get bombed all at one place.
Not bombed and killed, exactly. He writes a lot about that. And then in 45, they all ended up in Oberammergau in South Germany, where they eventually surrendered to the Americans. He came over to the States in early 1946, and we joined him in May of 47.
So you were born in Germany?
I was born in Germany near Stuttgart. And
just for the record, do you mind telling the date?
October 31st, 1945.
Okay.
I'm a Halloween baby.
All right.
We just lived, the town was called Weiblingen, actually. That's where a lot of the German families were reunited once the men were released from interrogation by the army. I just stayed there a few days because my mother was in the late days of pregnancy.
Oh, okay.
My father hoped actually to be there for my birth, but it didn't work out because they were they were in the process of moving all those men to Munich and then over to the United States. So he didn't find out I was born until January of the next year, in 46. And we stayed in Fort Bliss until May 1950.
Okay.
And then came to Huntsville, and that's where the Huntsville segment began.
Oh, very good.
My father worked for ABMA to begin with.
What part of ABMA?
I wish I knew. I don't have the exact
All right.
operation he was part of. I know he worked for Mr. Neubert.
Oh, for Neubert, all right.
Right.
That's a pretty good definition of what he was doing.
Okay. And then at some point in his career, he began working for the Quality and Reliability Lab, and eventually ended up as being the deputy of Mr. Grau, who was the man in charge.
Peter Grau, of course, is still living.
Yes, I saw him just a few months ago.
Yeah, I went to his, you probably did too, his 100th birthday.
Oh yeah, we were there together and
All right.
didn't know it.
We didn't know it. All right. We were there for his 100th birthday. Yes.
Right. Uh-huh.
Yeah, I knew him well. In fact, my late wife played music with his wife.
Oh really? Okay. I knew that she was in the orchestra.
Yeah.
And I know that her daughter, who I never really got to know, has taken up musicianship as a career.
Yes.
And I met her at the birthday party.
Yeah.
I know Peter, the son, because when I was a high school student, because of my father's connections, as happened for many of the German kids, we got jobs at Brown Engineering during the summer as engineering aides.
Good.
And Peter, my wife and I, carpooled. We picked him up. He was still under the age of being able to drive. So we would drive from our house. We lived in Darwin Downs, and we would drive over to Montvale to pick him up every morning, and then drive out to Brown Engineering. I worked there at Brown Engineering for 3 years, and that was probably my apprenticeship in the engineering world.
Mm-hmm.
And it helped me see that was not going to be my world. I went to Auburn after I graduated from Lee High School in 1964 and enrolled in the chemical engineering curriculum, but found even more that was not going to be what I wanted to do. It took me several years before I finally found out that my talents and interests were in the liberal arts.
Oh, very fine.
And I got a degree in English with a minor in German and history.
Now, the minor in German should have been easy.
It was, yes. I had a little bit of a background for it.
You had the right background for that.
Right. I graduated from Auburn in '68, and then was drafted into the Army the fall of that year. Spent a year in Fort Benning in the personnel section, and then unfortunately came down to be sent to Germany for a year.
Oh, that's
A hardship
what a
tour.
shame. Oh,
A hardship tour.
What a shame.
So I spent almost a year in Germany.
Getting reacquainted.
Getting reacquainted. It was lovely. I had relatives in Nuremberg and Munich, and every chance I got, I would get on the train and go visit them. So it was the 2 years for me was a paid vacation in Germany.
Yes.
I came out. I'd already been accepted for graduate school at Auburn in English. Got out of the Army and toured. I went to England. I went to France, the Netherlands, Italy, for 2 months.
Did the tour of Europe.
Yeah, right. Things I hadn't been able to do while I was in the Army because I concentrated on Germany. And went back to graduate school at Auburn in this winter of 1970. Had a rough time getting adjusted, dropped out, and then decided I was going to go back and stayed there for 3 years working on a master's degree. Unfortunately, during those 3 years, my interest dwindled in becoming a scholar or an academic, and I left without getting a degree. And then took a job as a speed reading teacher, a traveling speed reading teacher. So I went all over the country teaching at private schools, and finally had...
That's an interesting occupation.
Yes.
I don't think I've ever met anybody who did that before.
Okay. It really works. As a way of becoming a speed reading teacher, you also of course have to study the techniques, and it worked for me perfectly, and I came out with a very good speed reading rate and all that. I traveled to Georgia to teach, Virginia, outside Chicago, Mississippi, Alabama, Texas, up to Illinois again, and then I'd had enough of that. And being on the road isn't fun.
That can get tiring.
Yeah, exactly. Finding a place to live, not knowing people.
Did you have a family, or?
No, I didn't. I was by myself.
Okay.
And in '76, that's when I quit the speed reading job. I moved to Atlanta to live with my younger brother for a while, and then got a job at one of the Emory libraries and stayed there until 1982. By then I had met my girlfriend, Gudrun, who was my girlfriend in college for a while. We reunited and got married in 1982. Mm-hmm. And after I became a house spouse after that, I stayed home with our boy for 7 years. And then when he was old enough, in the second grade, I took a part-time job at the Gwinnett Public Library and stayed there until 2006. And then we moved back to the Huntsville area, and now we live in Madison.
Well, that's an interesting career, to say the least.
Varied.
Can you tell a little bit more about the later career of your father? Did he retire from, did he move to NASA when they?
Yes, he did, and I think in 68, no, not 68.
1960 was
1960, exactly. He moved over to NASA, and I'm not sure, he might have still been, I'm not sure who he was working for.
Well,
a lot of that documentation is in
that
book. Right, in his book, actually.
All right.
But eventually he did work his way up to Deputy Director of Quality and Reliability Division, which entailed quite a bit of traveling for him, because he was sort of the liaison with a lot of the contractors that built engines and that sort of thing, missile parts. So
sure.
He,
that was an essential job.
Right.
Visit the contractors and
right.
Be sure you knew what was going on at
right.
the contractor.
Exactly. And he was employed with NASA until 1970, and then got caught in the RIF, the reduction in force, in 1970. Yes. Found a job with Federal Electric here in town, which, as I understand it, were actually sort of contractors for the old Quality and Reliability Lab. At least as I read it from his autobiography.
Probably true. I didn't know that, but it sounds.
Right, I think they supported some of the work.
Yeah, it sounds logical.
Yeah, they had to fill in, obviously somehow,
yeah.
With the employees that they had to let go.
Yeah.
And he worked there until 1973 as an assistant to the director, I think. And finally, by that time, the economy was tightening up even more. The war in Vietnam was getting more intense, headed toward its end stage, but people were even being let go from Federal Electric at that point, and he decided that he was going to quit so that they wouldn't have to fire somebody who needed the job more. And that's when he ended his working career in 1973.
Well, he was at retirement age then.
Yes, exactly.
Not surprising thing to do.
Right. He lived until 1986.
You know the date?
September the 29th.
September 29th,
Right.
1986.
And he died in Germany.
Oh, he went back to Germany?
Yes, he'd gone back to Germany to visit an old friend.
Oh, so you were just visiting, not moving?
Visiting, no, not moved.
He visited in Germany?
Right, exactly. I visited the widow, well, my relatives and the widow of a man that he had worked for at Redstone, actually, Mr. Tubica.
Mm-hmm.
And he had a massive heart attack there and died.
What city was it in Germany?
It was Ottobrunn, which is outside of Munich. It's one of the suburbs of Munich.
Mm-hmm. Just for the record on the vital statistics, although it may be in the material. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. Well, that was an interesting. Did he enjoy? Did you enjoy the move to Huntsville and their family?
Well, at that point, I was only 5 years old.
Okay.
I was happy in Texas. That was all I knew since I came over as a baby.
Yeah, all right.
Everything seemed fine to me in Texas. We moved to Alabama, and I had no trouble fitting in. In the early days, of course, the Germans, even though we spread out throughout the city, we were still in contact with each other as we became assimilated. But then, after a while, people moved about even more, and I made American friends. And so by the time I was in the first grade, I was a natural American.
Yeah, having come here as a baby, you would be.
Right, I never had an accent.
No, okay, all right.
Except a southern accent.
All right, that's very fine. So you don't have any recollection at all of childhood in Germany since you were a baby?
No, I just know that we were in Landshut with all the other German dependents, children and wives, and in some cases grandmothers, and even sisters and brothers.
Did you and your mother come over alone, or
No, we were on one of these, I don't think it was a Liberty ship. But
now, your father didn't come over to accompany you?
No, he had come over the year before,
so
or even 2 years before.
So you came over alone to join him?
Right, exactly. We were part of the several waves of dependents that came to Fort Bliss in 47.
Okay.
I still have a good friend here in Huntsville who was on the same boat with me. So we're still.
Who is that?
Peter Fenzel.
Yeah.
I know you've talked to him.
Yeah, I know him.
So Huntsville is where I grew up, and
so you're almost a Huntsville native.
It's sort of my hometown.
It's sort of your hometown. All right. Well, what other experiences of you or your father would you like to relate? Well, we got the chance of putting things on the record.
Well, it's interesting. This is just family lore, and because I met my father when I was a year and a half old and had only lived with women, all of a sudden having a father was a very different experience.
Yes.
And he had to win me over. And he writes in his autobiography that the way he won me over was to sing German songs to me.
Oh.
I'm sitting on his lap, and he would sing German songs to me.
How nice.
He gave my older brother, who knew him. He was my older brother, 6 years older than I am.
What's his name?
Dieter. He was born in 1939. Went through the war years with my parents, and he, of course, had a father before he had to leave for the United States. And but my father says he gave him a canary to welcome him to the United States. Oh, I forgot also, my father gave me a teddy bear.
A teddy bear?
Which scared the heck out of me.
That's great.
But over the past, after the first couple of weeks, we adjusted each other and became a natural father and son.
Good.
I never knew that much about his work. We didn't talk about that directly. I knew he was involved in important work and took pride in that. There were times when NASA would have open house a day, where the families could go visit and see what what their fathers did. But for me, that was limited in what you could learn that day. It wasn't like take your dad taking you to work that day. This is a very different world from what I would know as a teenager even.
Sure.
But it was always a welcome thing to do, to see what was happening out there in a general way.
Do you remember the day of the landing on the moon? Was that something your family?
Well, I remember it because I was in the Army. I was actually
you were in the
Fort
Army
Benning.
at the time. I see. Right.
This was July 20th, 1969.
69, right.
Yes, I remember I was in the barracks, and it was like hell, because these were the old-style barracks that weren't air-conditioned. All we had was fans. But it was a great experience. It was early in the morning there at Fort Benning, and I had one of the guys that was in charge of our barracks had a television set, so I watched it with my fellow soldiers and got to see the
Knew
great
your
events.
father had been involved in it.
Oh, I took great pride in telling my Army buddies that my father had a lot to do with that.
What did he have to say about it? Did he ever talk about it?
Because I didn't get a chance to see him. This was 69,
Okay,
and I
so-
didn't get out of the Army until 70,
Okay.
even though I was in the States. I probably called him, or we talked, and I might have, patted him on the back, or said, well done.
Great work, yeah.
Mach es gut, oder sowas.
Yeah.
We certainly got in touch at some point about the achievement. And there were more to come, of course.
Yeah. Oh, yes, many more.
But everybody was very proud of what had been done for everybody, not just the Germans, but the whole outfit.
Oh, yeah.
They took thousands.
Yeah. Well, where were you then when the first U.S. satellite was launched?
Oh, well, here in Huntsville,
You would
the
have been,
Explorer,
yeah.
right. I don't think we made it downtown like many other folks did. I'm not sure. My father was, he was rather independent. I don't think it was for one reason or another, we just didn't go to that. Maybe because he didn't want to get in on all the hullabaloo.
Yeah, all right.
Stay out of the way of all
Yeah,
that.
yeah.
He knew what had happened and what it meant.
Obviously.
So that was good enough. He was never a joiner of such mass. Having seen it at first hand in a different environment, that sort of thing did not appeal to him usually.
Well, you mentioned you had some writing you did.
My father actually wrote a short autobiography.
Oh, that's very nice.
My father was convinced that he was going to die at the age of 60 because his great-grandfather, his grandfather, and his father and his brother had all died around the age of 60 or before.
Oh, my.
So in 73, when the next year was going to be 60, he decided it would be a good idea to put down a story, which is sort of the story of his life. It's not an autobiography in the strict sense. It's more a letter to his grandchildren that were born to my older brother Dieter, 3 children, and any prospective grandchildren who would come along later. And only one of them did, and that's my son.
Okay.
So it's couched in those terms. It's more or less a letter, but it covers the high points of his life. He doesn't write much about the NASA years. It sort of ends it with the ABMA work. I'm always sorry. I'm sorry, as a matter of fact, that I didn't follow up with him more, because I was close to him when he was writing this, and I helped edit it and just gave him ideas. And I'm sorry that I didn't urge him to go further or elaborate on parts of it, because it could have been a much more a bigger work. But there's plenty there. So, and we're very happy that we have this. Not all the parents
No,
left such
that's a very nice
documents
thing.
behind.
Very nice thing to have.
And it's helped me know him better through reading it and learning about what he went through.
Well, from your experience, are there any thoughts you'd like to leave with the younger people of this new generation? Any advice? Or,
that is a very hard thing to say, because I know this new generation is so very different from my generation. My son has, even though he has an English degree like I do, I know that he is not, technology doesn't mean the same thing to him that it meant to us, because the Cold War, I think, was an influential factor in the zeitgeist of our time.
yeah, very much so.
And there's a different zeitgeist now. It's probably climate change, which is intractable, I think. That's my opinion. Whereas going to the moon was something that could be done with enough willpower, enough money, enough brain, enough determination, exactly. That was something that could be achieved. This other thing that faces us these days, I think, is a different matter, which may yet be addressed technologically, I hope so, to deal with it or to change it. I really don't have any words of wisdom to pass on, except to wish everyone the best.
Okay.
We're not going to escape some of the effects ourselves,
yes,
as we already have seen lately.
Yes. Well, is there anything else you'd like to put on the record, or this is a good way to end the
I think it's, I really don't have much more to add.
Well, your father had a very interesting career, and you've had an interesting career. It's very
I would add that my older brother did become an engineer.
He did?
Yes. And I have a younger brother who became an industrial designer, so they sort of followed in my father's footsteps.
You were the...
I was the oddball.
The oddball, all right.
I was the middle child who often goes their own way.
Yep, yeah.
So we've all been happy in our lives, and have had good marriages and good children.
That's wonderful. That's a good way to end the conversation. Thank you very much for coming.
Thank you very much for this interview.